Hi. So, I would like to talk to you today about my early life, just to give you a little flavor of it. So, without any further ado, I was born at a young age, August 27, 1944, in Astoria, Queens. We lived in a small apartment above a hardware store on 43rd Street and Broadway. And we lived a short distance away from my father's uncle, Giuseppe. We used to call him C. Joe. He was my grandmother's brother, so my father was pretty close to him, and they would visit often. Um, okay, some of my earliest memories. After World War II, the government sold off a lot of their surplus military equipment that they didn't need anymore. My father put a bid in and he bought a 2.5 ton truck. He used it for his ice business. So we lived in Queens and he would drive over the 59th Street Bridge to Manhattan to his business. So he did that every day, 7 days a week. And my Uncle Frank lived with us. He helped my father in the ice business. Another early memory was being outside with my mother every day and waiting for my father to come home. And I would be put into the cab of the truck and drive down the street to a parking lot where my father had rented a space where he could keep the truck off the street. So it was a big deal for a little kid, 2, 3 years old, 4 years old, to ride in a truck with his daddy. Another memory I have, not a pleasant one, 1946, just before I was 3, my Uncle Frank was watching me and I ran. I was a little, well, as I said, just short of 3. And I put my hand through a door. It was a French door, it had panes. And so I pushed through and a shard of glass was sticking up when I yanked my hand out and I tore up my wrist and was bleeding. They took me to the hospital and long story short, my mother was told I'd never use my hand again, but I was referred to an orthopedic surgeon who was able to restore the use of my hand after physical therapy and whatnot. So that was a good ending to it. But it was I can remember it to this day, which is weird. So in 1949, my father got a lease on a rooming house in Manhattan, and we moved there. So it was on 327 West 55th Street, between 8th and 9th Avenue. My mother was the super. She didn't work, right? She was raising us. Isabel was born by that time. Isabel was born in January of 1947, so she was 2 years old. And she cleaned the rooms. There were 12 rooms in the house, and they were rented by the week. And my father had taken this lease out so that my father bought a TV set. It's another memory, right? TV was just starting out. It wasn't the 24 hours a day kind of programming that exists today. TV was only on the air for maybe 2, 3 hours a day. The screen was perhaps 9, 10 inches, and it's black and white, not color, of course, and totally different from what you're used to. And my favorite show, it was a kid show that came on the air. It was called Howdy Doody, and I remember having to watch this show every day. So we lived our life there for a couple of years, and then my father bought the house in Jackson Heights where we moved to and where I basically grew up. So Jackson Heights was a nice neighborhood, stable, secure. There's nothing not to like about it. residential. And he bought, it was a two-family house. We shared a driveway with people who lived across the driveway. And it was just a good place to be. So I was a new kid on the block. I had to go through a rite of passage to be accepted by the other little boys who lived there. So I used to get the hell beat out of me every day because I was new and not accepted yet. And I remember my sister, Isabel, had made a friend, and up the street, a little girl, and they played with dolls, and I didn't like being beat up, so I hung out with them and played with dolls. And when the boys would see me playing with dolls, that made it worse. And so then when they had the opportunity, they'd beat the hell out of me again because I played with dolls. So this went on for a while until finally, I guess they got tired of beating up on me and said, well, he's not going any place, so we might as well accept him. And I became accepted by the neighborhood kids, the neighbor boys. But it was actually a good, simple time to grow up. I remember on the weekends, you'd come out on a Saturday morning, and by 9 o'clock, boys would be coming out of their houses, and we'd get together, and you'd have enough kids to form two teams, and we'd play football or stickball or stoop ball or whatever we could come up with. Settle our own little arguments. We would have do-overs if there was a ball play that was in question, and you got along. You learn how to negotiate with your fellow man. So Jackson Heights was a nice little place to live. It was a playground a block away from me that had swings and whatnot, and you could go there and play. It was a New York City playground. Started school. It was a Catholic school, Our Lady of Fatima. My parents wanted us to go to Catholic school, so it was a financial sacrifice for my father because he made like $40 a week, and I think he got $60 a month rent. So he didn't have a big income, and the tuition at the school was $30 a month, so it was a pretty good chunk of money. So they made a sacrifice to have us educated. In school, there was a dress code. Boys wore blue pants, a blue shirt, a blue tie, and the girls wore a dark blue jumper with a light blue blouse. You could hear a pin drop. The nuns ran a tight ship. There could be 40 children in the class, and you could hear a pin drop because they brooked no insolence, no insubordination, no nothing. So you towed the line. They were called the Grey Nuns of the Sacred Heart. A very good teaching order, and they were dedicated ladies, I gotta say that. And my other claim to fame as a child in that school was that I was chosen to be an altar boy when I was in the 3rd grade, and I did it through grade 8. And I guess I was chosen because I had good grades, so if I was pulled out to do a funeral mass or something, it wouldn't impact my education because I could easily catch up. And by the way, doing a funeral mass was a good gig for a little kid because you would get a quarter or 50 cents sometimes from the funeral director if you brought back the carriage that the coffin had been on. So 50 cents in 1955, 56 was big money. And so if you were chosen to do a funeral, it was like, wow, I hit pay dirt. We lived also 3 blocks in Jackson Heights from my father's first cousin, Paul Tempesta. His father and my grandmother were brother and sister. Saw my family pretty much. His cousin Paul, we'd also see my father's uncle and his children and other cousins growing up. It just, that's what they did. They socialized with family, my parents. Vacations, there were none. Since my father was didn't have a lot of money, right? And as I told you, it cost him, $30 a month to send us to school, plus the uniforms. So we didn't really go on vacations. If he worked through his vacations instead of taking a vacation. This way he'd be paid for the vacation, plus he'd earn the week's pay. But we did go on one. It was in 1954. I still remember it. We went to Atlantic City, right on the Atlantic Ocean. There's beach there, and we stayed in a motel, and we were there probably 4 or 5 days, and it was a nice vacation. Isabel was, well, she was 2 years younger than me, so she had to be about 7, 8 years old. And that was our one and only family vacation. Oh, funny story that I just remembered about Our Lady of Fatima. So I had to be maybe in the 3rd grade, and Isabel was in 1st grade. And somebody came to the classroom to get me. I was taken to the principal's office. And I was probably wondering, what did I do now, But as it turns out, my sister had an accident and made in her pants, and I had to take her home to get changed. And we had to walk the 3 blocks home, and there happened to be a stray dog passing by, and he got a whiff, and he must have liked what he smelled, so he was following Isabel, and I'm trying to shoo him away all the way home. It was a sight to behold, to say the least. Well, here's another funny story. Isabel and I had a dog, and we liked it. It was a mutt. My father brought it home. We swore up and down, Isabel and I, that we would take care of the dog, but as is universally known, children don't keep their word, and the responsibility for the dog went to the parents. Well, my mother found out she was pregnant with Tony, and I guess she and my father made the decision the dog had to go. So my mother sat Isabel and me down, and she presented it to us in these terms, that we're going to have an addition to the family. So what would we rather have? What would we rather keep? The dog or the new brother and sister? And Isabel and I blurted out, probably simultaneously, we want the dog. Or in good old New York accent, we want the dog. So, needless to say, the dog went and Tony stayed. That's the story of the dog and Tony. These are just a few little random recollections, and I just wanted to share them with you, give you a little sense of what it was like, and hopefully these pictures that I have going on in the background will give you a little visual depiction also.